Hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. This is The Naturalist Capitalist, and I'm Reed Coverdale. And I've got a special guest on the show today. I've got Dan Behrman. How's it going, Dan?
Hey, it's going pretty awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is cool. We've been trying to figure this scheduling out for a couple months, but I've been looking forward to having you on. Um, you ran for president as a libertarian since like 2016, and now you're running for governor. But I've been reading about you, and you're a pretty interesting guy. You're into activism, and you've been around the world talking about your ideas. So before we get into your race, if you want to just tell us about what you've done before running as a politician, what your message has been, and just any interesting parts about your travel and the places you've been, the people you've talked to.
Sure. So, yes, it's kind of an interesting story because this was like never something I really wanted to get involved in. I was always kind of like, I hate politics. That's boring. Why do you watch? Who cares about it? One vote doesn't change anything. That sort of thing. Um, but as I kind of, probably turned into a teenager and started getting interested in building a business and that sort of thing. Um, I realized that, the government was really interfering with my ability to do that. It was telling me I couldn't do certain things that I wanted to do. It was telling me if I do want to make some money, they're going to take half of it. All these things that were going on. And I was like, this isn't right. And it started out where I was like afraid to say anything because it was almost like, if I said like, yeah, why should the IRS take any money from me? I got this look from people like, like, what are you, crazy? Like, they're going to come and kill you if you try to just for speaking or thinking such things. And so, I did stay kind of quiet for a while because of that. But then after a while, I was just like, no, this isn't right. And I started learning more about it. I started learning from Erwin Schiff and why can't I think of his name? Joe.
Sure.
I can't think of his last name right now. um, but I started realizing that they had a lot of information about how you don't even have to pay an income tax. There's actually the way the law is written, it doesn't even apply to everybody. It's like this really got me to like become more vocal. And as I got more vocal about it, I guess I got kind of more comfortable in being vocal and realizing, hey, the FBI is not kicking down my door to just swat me in the middle of the night. And so maybe I do have a little bit of free speech here, and I can use that to inspire others to learn all this information. Joe Bannister. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. But so I became more vocal, and I started seeing that it was actually inspiring other people. I started one of my earliest, I guess, I don't know if you want to call it a magic trick, was making traffic tickets disappear. So I had friends that are always coming to me like, hey, I got a traffic ticket. How do I get out of it? And at the same time, like I had become really good at this, and I would give them a ton of advice, but then they would just almost like feel defeated after I gave them all the advice. And it was because the all of the information that I had to give them, it was almost like they had to become lawyers themselves just to figure out this trap that they got stuck in. And that just didn't seem right to me. Like, you shouldn't have to be, we have rights, whether they're human rights or God-given rights or constitutional rights, however you want to look at it. We have rights. And in order to exercise these rights, you have to be a lawyer. That doesn't make any sense. So this was another thing that I just like, I started speaking out more against and saying, like, we shouldn't have to. Yes, if you know all these wonderful things, you can walk into a court and you can just totally screw over the government that's trying to extort you and all this other stuff. But it shouldn't have to be that way. We shouldn't have to be legal experts just to be able to live our lives. So I started talking about this more. I started getting into the whole police misconduct thing, probably like around early 2000s. And, I saw a lot of what was going on there and all the injustices. So I ended up meeting with a couple lawyers that were pretty much libertarian also, and, just learning so much more information. I started a website called accountableauthority.com, which was a database for people to make reports against police that would be public, because two things that I found in my trials and tribulations were, one, a lot of times if you try to file a complaint against the police, they won't even take the complaint, or they'll threaten you for trying to make a complaint. And two, if you ever need access to those complaints, like let's say you've been harassed by a police officer and you want a history of all the other complaints that have been made against him, they keep that very, very secretive. And even through the courts, it's very difficult to subpoena or request that information. So if it's public, then they can't do that. So that was a project that I did. And and then I stumbled on the Libertarian Party and started getting involved in politics and running for office. And really what I found is getting elected doesn't change anything. I kind of came to this realization. It doesn't matter if I win. If all the people out there are still going to demand that I raise taxes and give them free stuff, or they're going to demand that I use the police force to enforce some bullshit law about, you can't smoke this or you can't have that. It doesn't make any difference. We have to change that. We have to fundamentally change the way our society thinks if we want to live in a free society. So that's really where I started to realize this is about more than just winning an election. Not that I'm not ever running to win. Anytime I run one of these elections, I'm doing my best to win as many votes as possible. But I understand that there are two ways I can win votes. One is to compromise my message, which is absolutely not even on the table. The other is that we have to change the way that people think and understand our rights and freedom and liberty and what a free society is. And then they'll just naturally select me because I'm the only one who's representing that. So, and this message has been, a few guys reached out to me from Uganda. I ended up taking a trip out there just to talk about some of these ideas, and they're now forming a Libertarian Party, and they've got about 16 local candidates who are running for local offices, and it's just amazing. So yeah, it's like, I don't know. I don't know how I got involved in all of this, but it's really just amazing that I'm able to reach so many people, and that a lot of people love the information that I'm bringing them.
Yeah, no, that's cool. What's the name of your YouTube channel? I know you have a YouTube channel. I'd like people to go check you out.
So youtube.com/taxation is theft. And there's usually, like, I've got a few videos, campaign videos and some other things, but there's a lot of really good conversations that I have with people. Just, I've got a podcast. We had the Taxation is Theft Fest a couple months ago where we crammed like 40 interviews into a weekend. It was amazing. But it's really, there's a lot of really great conversations just on all aspects of libertarianism and how it all relates to taxes, which is like the linchpin of the whole system, right? Because if you think police are abusive, they're all paid for with taxes, and there's no way we can say, well, I'm going to take my money out of that and invest in a better police department, because you're forced at gunpoint to continue to pay the bad ones. I don't like those politicians. Well, too bad. You're paying their paychecks, and you're paying their entire police force that they're using to enforce all the shitty laws that they come up with. Like this is, I try to, through all these conversations, relate this back to taxes and say, if you really want to make a change, stop paying taxes.
So have you stopped paying taxes, or how is that working out?
For the most part. Yeah. I'm not paying income tax right now. I've tried this before, and it didn't end too well, but I didn't really have the full picture of what I was doing, so I made some mistakes. But hey, at the end of the day, I still, there was a $50,000 tax bill with the IRS that I ended up not having to pay, because their entire system is bullshit, and now it's past statute of limitations, so they can't even send me letters on that anymore. But it's as far as like, I have my online stores. I don't charge any sales tax for anything that I sell. I try to reduce all the taxes that I pay. Obviously, whenever I fill my car with gas, the gas tax is already included, so there's no way around that. Sales tax, all these things I still end up having to pay. Although I did find out recently in Texas, you can fill out a certificate of tax exemption, and you just have to show it when you buy something, and they'll exclude the taxes. It doesn't need to be issued by the state. And there's no background check to make sure you're a business or this or that. And the reason for that is because apparently there's a federal law that says you can't tax money, which makes sense. But you also can't tax anything when that tax is calculated by the amount of money. So that's how sales taxes works. That's how car taxes work, which is I don't register cars. I don't have a driver's license, any of that stuff. So
Wow.
so I've been able to opt out of a lot of those. So yeah, I'm very well on my way to not paying any taxes, but and I think I've eliminated some of the big ones. But yes, it's still to some degree inevitable.
Yeah.
For now.
So you decided, if I'm getting this right, you decided to throw your hat into the ring for the Libertarian nomination right after Gary Johnson won because you weren't happy with the decision and you ran all the way until this year. Do you want to talk about why you did that? How that went?
So it's interesting because in 2012, I was like all about Ron Paul. So I was like, yeah, Ron Paul. But then he got totally screwed out of the nomination with the Republican Party. And that was right around the time I learned about the Libertarians. So I was like, okay, Gary Johnson, just because he was a Libertarian. I really didn't know that much about him. 2016, I was supporting John McAfee. I actually worked on his campaign. And, I was just like in love with the idea that he's like, he's an animal. He's like libertarian incarnate, right? So I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I got to support this guy. And Gary Johnson was like, to me, he was just like, he's okay. I'll still support him if he gets the nomination. But through some interactions with him, I learned that this whole taxation is theft thing, he wasn't a huge fan of it. He was pushing for the fair tax, which there's no such thing as a fair tax. And then also the whole bake the cake thing, which I was like, yeah, okay, but no libertarian's perfect. I kind of, I made excuses for like everything. And I was like, okay, fine. And then he got the nomination, but then he got up and he made his acceptance speech. And in his speech, he said taxation is theft and everybody cheered. And I was like, okay, now you're just a fucking liar. So I'm out. So at that point, I withdrew my support from him. And I said, you know what, I'm going to run. And so this was like that day. I didn't really start campaigning until like maybe 2018, but that day in 2016 was when I announced that I was going to run. And during this campaign, so after 2018, things were going really amazing. I was at the top of the polls for a while there in the in all the primaries that were going on. I reached a lot of people. We reached, it's social media numbers. So it's really difficult to tell, but I mean, we reached millions of people with our ads running online. We got so much, wonderful email and contact coming from people saying like, hey, you turned me from like a communist Democrat into a libertarian and who thinks taxation is theft, like all these amazing things. And so, it was just a total amazing experience. And what I realized like at some point was, whatever our chances are of winning is that I am reaching so many people with such an important message that no matter what happens, whether it ends at the primary, which it did, or whether I get the nomination and it ends in November at the general election and I don't make it, this must continue on, however it has to happen. So as soon as I didn't make the nomination, while the convention was still going on, I went to Twitter and announced that I'm running in 2022 for governor, and I also announced I'm running for president in 2024 again. So I've got two campaigns coming up. Yeah, but we'll do them one at a time. But really, it's like when I was running for president, it's like as much as I was really just trying to focus the message within the United States, I was getting a ton of support from everywhere outside of the United States, from Australia, from Canada, Uganda, from Sweden. and Hong Kong, and like it was just insane.
Yeah.
And so it's like this message really, like, this message doesn't like borders. It wants to get out there, and the whole world wants to know it. So we're going to continue fighting Governor 2022, President 2024, and we're going to help influence as many other countries as we possibly can, because people in other countries want to be free too.
So is Texas's governorship every 2 years, the elections, or is it every 4 years? Or
It's every 4. It's every 4, and it's offset from the it's staggered with the U.S. presidential elections.
All right. So who's the governor of Texas right now, and what do you think of that person?
It's this guy, Greg Abbott, and he's I guess the short story is he's a tyrant. He's been, especially when this Corona thing popped up, he's been issuing executive orders. You have to stay inside. You have to shut down these businesses. You have to wear masks. All these things, which is really interesting because he has no authority to issue an executive order against me or any other resident of Texas. His executive orders are limited to the people who work for him. That's how an executive order works. And somehow he issues his press releases to the media parrots everything that he says. And now everybody's in this mindset that, oh, well, it's an executive order. Even if I don't think it's right, I have to follow it. And that's just not how we should be thinking. And it kind of sucks because on one hand, we should have leadership that issues unconstitutional, unethical executive orders, and we should have people who are understanding enough to say, yeah, we know that's not right, and we're not going to follow it. That's really the way it should be, because ultimately, I don't know. There's kind of this weird feeling that I have where if we ever get somebody into office that's going to be like the really great libertarian, whatever, free thinking, freedom advocate of a leader, and everybody follows suit and says, yeah, this is great, then as soon as that person retires or dies or whatever, and some new person has to come in, all that person has to do is start issuing some tyrannical orders. And if all these people were never thinking for themselves in the first place, they were just following somebody who happened to be talking about freedom, now when a tyrant is back in office, they're going to be back into following what the tyrants say. And I think that's really dangerous. And to that effect, like I've thrown this out as just an idea, but like I might want to, if I ever get elected anywhere, issue some executive orders that I expect people not to follow, and make them so ridiculous. Like you have to wear orange on Thursdays, and expect people not to wear orange on Thursdays, so that they understand. Like what's that game? Simon Says, right? Like you have to understand when a leader in a position of authority tells you something, you need to think for yourself when it's right and when it's wrong, when it's right to disobey.
Yeah, man, you are hitting home with that right there. That is something on this show that I talk about all the time, because I've said that, we like to blame everything on our politicians, which they do deserve a lot of blame.
Right.
And we like to blame the media. We like to blame all these things outside of ourselves, but we share an equal amount of blame because we fall for it. We don't think for ourselves. We don't push ourselves. I really like what you're saying there, and that goes with your message earlier that you were talking about, that it's not even about winning. It's about changing the people's minds to a point, and getting the people to realize what's going on. That's really true. I mean, and I don't think I've ever heard any politician or person running for any office describe it the way you just did. That was on point.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I've been following you on Twitter for a few months, and I'm a fan, definitely, and I like a lot of the things you say. You're basically just going to kick every single agent of any unconstitutional agency out of Texas if you become governor. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the IRS being one of them, the IRS, and I've seen this personally, both in how in my dealings with them and with other people that I know, and I've seen the documentation and everything. The way the IRS works, because most people don't have to pay the income tax, but what they do is they coerce people. They file illegal paperwork. They send illegal documents to banks, asking them to give them all the money in an account. And these documents have no actual legal force behind them. But the banks are always afraid, and they take the side of the government over, some little customer that's not making, like, whose side are they going to take? The little customer that's making them like, $5 a year, or the IRS who can just shut them down entirely, right?
Right.
And so they use all these manipulative tactics, and that just doesn't belong in a free society at all. Now, as governor, I can't shut down the IRS because that's a federal program. But what I can do is the state government does have the authority to arrest federal officers in the state of Texas who are committing state crimes. Just because you're a federal agent does not mean you can come into a state and break all the state laws. It doesn't mean that you can come in there and break federal law. You're still breaking the law. You're still a criminal. You can still be arrested. And we can also say, to a certain extent, we can tell certain agencies they're not allowed to operate at all within the state. So we have agencies like the ATF, we have agencies like the IRS, the FBI to some degree. All these agencies that are doing very illegal, unconstitutional things will not be allowed there. They're there with the consent of the state government at this point. And if the state withdraws that consent, they have no obligation to provide that. If they withdraw that consent, then these agencies have to go, or they have to cease their activities. And I think that's really important to remember, because we've got things like gun ownership. We've got federal laws, and there's a Second Amendment that says, shall not be infringed, which means all
Right.
gun laws are unconstitutional. So any gun law that Congress passes, whether it's a background check or something like that, cannot be enforced in the state of Texas. And in fact, and I still need to do a little bit more research into this, but in the same way that nobody has to pay the income tax, I believe that there is, to some degree, a lot of the background checks are enforced in the same way, where if a gun dealer decides that they don't want to enforce background checks, then they don't have to. But it's the state police and the state governments that are kind of coercing them into falling in line with all these programs. So that's going to take a little bit more investigation to figure out what we can actually do there, without changing the laws and without ruling by executive order and that sort of thing. But I think there really is a lot that can change in regards to federal laws without actually having to change the law or having to secede from the union or anything like that.
So what would your ideal state government look like? If you don't believe in taxation, how do you fund things? If you become governor, is your goal to just dismantle everything you can, or is it reconfiguring how it works? What is your overall vision for Texas versus what it is right now?
Well, I think for one, we need to look at what programs are violating people's rights. So we've got a lot of highway robbery, literally, going on. We've got a lot of criminalizing peaceful activity like possession of cannabis and any other drugs, as long as you're not bothering anybody else. These things need to go. We have something I've been advocating lately is to just completely, some people are talking about defunding the police, completely get rid of the police. And I know that sounds like shocking, right? Like, well, what are we going to do about police? There are two completely distinct agencies. First of all, half of the country lives in an area that is not serviced by police. They're serviced by sheriffs. They're serviced by other law enforcement, but not by police. Police are basically, they work for private corporations, which are incorporated cities. I know people like, wait, corporation, isn't that like Walmart? No, corporations are fictitious entities created with special protections by state governments, and police departments in cities are corporations. And when you have a police department, that police department works for the corporation. They do not work for the people. Oftentimes, the police chiefs are not elected, like a sheriff is elected. They're protected so that you can't sue them. We talk a lot about qualified immunity, but there's also a layer of protection through the corporation itself. If you sue if a police officer shoots and kills somebody, you sue the city because the officer was working for the city, the corporation. If a sheriff's deputy shoots and kills somebody, there is no corporation. That deputy is under the direct responsibility of the sheriff himself. You can sue the sheriff, and there's a lot more accountability that way. Plus, you can vote them out, which is not always the case with the chief of police.
Right.
The sheriff is responsible to the people of a state, whereas the police chiefs are responsible to the mayor. That's their boss. So in this way, like we can really talk about eliminating police, and if you could look at it this way: all the police will quit their job and they'll go work for the sheriff, and you'll still have the same number of police. You'll just have a different system that's a lot more accountable. But of course, we do want to reduce the size of police because a lot of what they do is not solving crime. A lot of what they do is tax revenue. We do want people out there that are solving real crimes like rapes and murder and burglary and theft and arson and all these other things. But we don't want them out there busting people for possession of marijuana and whatever. An entire force out there giving out traffic tickets and all this nonsense just to raise revenue. We got to get rid of that. There's a lot of state bureaucracies that we can get rid of. But what's really interesting is because you brought up the good point. So would you just get rid of everything? Because obviously they have to have some sort of money to operate. A lot of states, especially Texas, have so many other sources of revenue that are not taxes. In Texas, you've got parks that we can get into whether or not they legally acquired the land, but they have parks where they charge an entrance fee, and that entrance fee covers the operation of the parks, sometimes more. Sometimes they have other assets that they can lease. In Texas, and again, not that I completely agree with how they took ownership of this, but according to the Constitution, they own all of the oil that's under the ground. So that's one way there. If you read through the Texas Constitution, that's actually one business tax that they're allowed. There's not much in there about creating business taxes and business licenses for cutting and braiding hair, but there is something in there about taxing oil because they basically say, well, this is all of our oil. And so this is one of the reasons that Texas is one of the few states that doesn't typically have a huge deficit because they have so much money coming in from their oil taxes. So that on its own is huge. But we have to start looking at this. It's like, we have toll roads that were built by the state. Okay, fine. Let them raise some money. Don't let them abuse that power. Don't let them use that as like, okay, we're going to charge $50 a month to be able to drive on this road, and we're going to take this money and stick it into these really crappy projects that nobody wants. No, a lot of these things, they start out with, we're going to issue a bond. People will buy the bonds. We'll build the road. We'll charge a little bit of money to pay off the bonds, and then that's going to be the end of it. If that's what the program was designed to do, then do that. And what's really interesting about that is when they raise the initial funds by selling bonds, this is the public saying, it's not about, is there a vote? Like, do 51% of the people say we want to build this project, and so therefore the other 49% are going to be forced to pay for it? No, what it is if 51% want to build this project, 51% will invest as much as they want into these bonds. And right. That will be enough money for the project, and the other 49% don't have to pay a dime. And if you want to say, okay, we're going to charge for the use of this project, fine, because the other 49% that didn't pay into it, they're not going to be sad that they didn't get to use it if they didn't pay for it, and they weren't paying all the endless list of taxes to pay for this program. So there really is an interesting way that we can solve all these problems if we actually just take taxes off the table and say, how do we get this done?
So the counter argument to that is going to be, what about the really poor people? Because if we have taxes, then, it kind of covers for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to pay the toll or the fee or whatever it is. What would you say to that? How do you jump that hurdle?
So there's that can get really complicated because you have to ask a lot of questions. Why is this person on this road in the first place if they're so poor? Are they going to a job? Because if they're using that road for a job, then they should be getting paid enough money. And if you start looking at that, it's like, okay, well, yeah, but then you have these greedy employers that don't want to pay so much. Well, yeah, that's true to an extent, but at the same time, you have to factor in the entire the entire cost of living and everything else. Why is the cost of living so high? A lot of that comes down to property taxes and everything else. If you get rid of the income tax and the property taxes, then what happens is this person who's driving on this road to get to work and then having to spend all that money on the toll road, which usually isn't even that much for like a single car. They usually charge more for big trucks. Then you eliminate a lot of the taxes that are going into that, which means there's a lot more money in their pocket. If you get rid of a lot of the regulations on mortgages and all these other things, you can actually get people who can buy their homes and stay in their homes, and now they're not paying rent, they're not paying property tax, and now they don't have a whole lot of expenses at all. And the cost of that little road, that little thing to get back and forth to work, becomes almost nothing. So it's really a huge, we kind of have this huge ball of knots, and everything that comes up where it's like, okay, but what about poor people not being able to have this? The problem is, in this country, I like to make a distinction between being poor and being in poverty. When you're in poverty, you are suffering and struggling just to get by. When you're poor, you just don't have anything. And down here, I'm in Mexico right now, and down here I see a lot of poor people, and they are happy as hell. Like everything is going great for them. They don't have anything. They'll find a couple trees, they'll throw up a hammock, they'll sleep there. Then when, during the day, they'll go buy something, they'll stand on the side of the road, they'll sell it. They're very poor, they don't have a lot, but they are happy. Right. And that's because they're not being sucked out of this, they're even when they have very little, they don't have this government leeching away at them. Whereas in the United States, if you have very little, if you're very poor, you still have the government sucking you dry. You're still paying property tax. You're still paying taxes on everything. And property tax is so evil because property tax is just like, let's say you're poor, but you live in a house that you grew up in that was handed down to you by your great grandparents, and you just have this house, this little piece of property. It's nothing fancy. It's not worth a whole lot, but to the government, it's worth a lot, and you have to pay a high property tax on that. Now, basically what they're saying is, okay, we understand you have a little piece of property, maybe a little piece of land, maybe some garden where there's enough food for you to eat, maybe some wild animals in the back that you can hunt. You've got all that, but you have to pay us to keep that. So what does that mean? That means you have to go get a job. You might have been happy not having a whole lot, being poor. You would have been happy, but now the government is forcing you into poverty because they're saying, if you don't go get a job and continue to pay our taxes, we will drag you out of your house. We'll auction it off to some factory farm. You'll be left homeless and in the streets with absolutely nothing, not knowing how to survive that way because you've never lived that way before. And that's what you're going to get from the government. And if you eliminate all of these things and leave people to be, there are so many people that will, the cost of living is going to drop tremendously. People are going to be able to not just barely get by, they're going to be able to thrive. They're going to be able to start building up savings. We're going to see an entire generation of people who own their homes. They're not paying mortgages until they're 60 or 70 and retiring. We're going to start seeing a lot fewer people who are having to rent. This is the direction we should be heading in. But of course, you have the government who's like, no, we're making a shit ton of money off these people. Let's keep them paying all these taxes. Let's keep them renting. Let's keep ownership of the land for ourselves. And that's really what's hurting us the most.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense, and it's hard to get people to think outside the box. Because, for example, that question I just asked, I was obviously playing devil's advocate there. But if you really think about your response, if you have a tax through a toll or through usage payments or fees or whatever, then that payment just goes directly to whatever, whatever you're using, whether it's the road or a bridge or a park or whatever. If you have an income tax, it's so bloated because it's just going to the top and it's this big centralized system that's supposed to disperse all these different funds in all these different areas, and there's obviously going to be embezzlement, and there's going to be, lack of, nothing's going to be efficient. There's going to be a ton of money lost if everything is funded through use directly. Then it's going to be way more efficient. And then everything you laid out about how if you're not taxing people for what they own, then they can actually own stuff more easily. They won't have to work as long. I mean, all these ideas are things that a lot of people on the left even want. The whole idea of all their social programs is so that we don't have to work till we're 70, so that we can own a house, so that we can have decent health care. And it's just like trying to bridge that gap of misunderstanding and saying, yes, we want the same things. Now listen to my ideas, just think outside the box. So has that been is that like the biggest, is that the biggest hurdle you have to jump doing all your speaking and talking to people, just getting them to think outside of what they've been taught their whole lives? Or
I think, it definitely has been a challenge in the past, but the way I typically approach that now, especially with the left, is, this is typically how libertarians, or someone on the right would say, you're wrong. Socialism is wrong. It's going to kill everybody, and your ideas are stupid. And that doesn't work. But when you say, okay, look, what are you like? Are you ultimately just trying to get a bunch of free stuff? What do you really want? And when you ask them this question, they come out and they say exactly what you say. Look, I don't want to be working all my life. I want to be able to retire. I want to be able to buy a house and raise a family and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, I can't be mad at that. I want to be able to afford health care. You can't be mad at that. And when you have people like that and they're being told by politicians, either you're going to suffer or you're going to get it for free from the government, then I want it for free from the government, because out of these two options, that's the only one that doesn't suck. But no one's coming to them and saying, hey, look, we can get you that. And healthcare is a big one. With healthcare, I say, I usually go to the insulin argument, because we have insulin, which is manufactured in the United States, and it's sold in the United States, where only 3 companies are allowed to sell it, for $100 for a pen. Now you go to Mexico, and that same pen is exported to Mexico and sold in Mexico for $12.
right.
But it's illegal to buy the pens for $12 and bring them back into the United States. Why? Because they're not there. They say, oh, it's for your safety. We need to make sure. No, because it's already safe. It's already sold in the United States from that same manufacturer. The only reason is they're keeping the prices up. So yeah, let's get the prices down. Let's make it actually affordable. Let's not steal from people to pay for it for you so it feels like it's affordable. Let's actually make it affordable, because when you don't have to steal from somebody else, they'll actually help you get what you want, because it's probably going to benefit them too, right? Because all the people on the right, they would love to have insulin at 12% of the price, at 80, what is that, 88% off? They would love that. Right? It's not just the Democrats who are asking for that. So what they resent is that you want to steal from them. So you really just have to, like you said, take it from this perspective of like, what you want is not a bad thing, but let me explain how we can get you there. That's not what you've been told for the last few decades or however long. Yeah,
it seems like there's this intentional division that's been created between the two factions, and and it's mostly through language. It's mostly through kind of what you said, how you approach the subject, and so a lot of people on the left are just they're instantly turned off by the idea of markets. They just don't even want to hear anything.
It's a bad word.
And then people on the right, even if you talk about like, oh, we want more affordable healthcare, some of them are like, what are you, a communist? It's like, what do you mean? Right. How can you be against that? So it's really just trying to get by these, the semantics of the conversation, and then trying to get everyone to realize, hey, we all want to be able, for everything to be cheap and high quality and everyone to be able to live happily. Do you think where do you think that comes from? Is that intentional through the media? Is that intentional through, our society, because the big guys know that if we figure this out, they're in trouble, because they can capitalize off of this vision? Where do you think that comes from?
I mean, there's a few different ways. One is we have to understand that words are not concrete. So when I say one word to you, I might mean it one way, and you're going to understand it as something else. So like when you describe affordable health care, well, the Affordable Health Care Act was the Obamacare thing, which was a tax. So to the people on the right, when they hear affordable health care, they hear socialism.
Right.
And to the people on the left, they hear free. So it's, this is politicians taking words and manipulating them to mean different things. And of course they do this all the time. And sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes it's just through societal, like, the games we play when we're kids, operator, where you whisper a word into somebody's ear and you take turns all around the room, and then the last person to say it's something totally different because it just changed. And the same thing there, we're talking about the word itself changing, but it's the meaning of the words change as we have conversations. So that's kind of natural within a society. But we also have the media, which is kind of a center of the distribution of information. And so when the media uses certain words, and then when they tell us what those words mean, then you have a society that starts to grow on that. But if I'm watching Fox News and you're watching CNN, then we still have completely different understandings of what those words mean. So, and sometimes it's completely intentional. So if you look at the word anarchy, which first started coming up around, I think it was in the 1400s, where it became a problem to the kings. The kings wanted to, exert rule over the people, and there were these people who were like, yeah, no, we don't like that. We don't need rulers. Oh, well, you guys are anarchists, which literally means without rulers. You want to live without rulers, which doesn't sound like such a bad thing. But then the rulers who didn't like that turned that into mean, oh yeah, they want anarchy, which means chaos and destruction and disorder and all these other things, and you're going to live in a terrible society where people are stealing from you and killing you and all this other stuff, which is the same threat that Trump made, right? About Mexicans, they're not sending their best people, rapists and murderers. It's the same kind of tactic, right? But they can completely distort an entire word from its original meaning, so that when an educated anarchist wants to use the word anarchy, and they're talking about a peaceful civilization that just simply does not have a tyrannical ruler, those people are looked down on by outsiders who don't understand that word, by saying, oh, you're a crazy person who wants to throw Molotov cocktails at everything. And so we have that breakthrough. And so this is I like to use the word anarchy in certain company, but when I'm talking with anarchists, I tell them, don't use this word when you're trying to have a conversation and open someone's mind about how society works, because as soon as you say that word, they have this picture in their head, and you're trying to draw a completely different picture. But as soon as you say that word, that picture's there, and you can't erase it and you can't draw over it. So words are they're not concrete, and they can be very helpful, but they can be very dangerous.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we have you to help us out, because the libertarians, I feel like in general, they're so bad at messaging. I mean, just absolutely terrible. And that's why I started this channel. It's why I started my Twitter page, because I figured I can explain these ideas to people in a better way than most libertarians are, because we're so good at turning people away. We're good at turning other libertarians away because we don't agree on political minutia. There's just these tiny little details that we don't agree on, and completely alienate them. The other thing, seeing Rand Paul go talk at the Republican National Convention, most people in the country, when they hear the word libertarian, they think of Ron Paul or Rand Paul, because they don't know who any of us are. They barely even know we exist as a party. So they really have this idea that we're like a wing of the Republican thought. And, if someone listened to everything that you've been saying throughout this podcast, they would not put you in that camp at all. So there's this really negative messaging that we have to overcome. And I actually like Spike Cohen and Joe Jorgensen this year, mostly because of their messaging. I mean, their messaging is so obviously not what Gary Johnson's was, we're Republicans on economics, and we're Democrats on social issues. They're really showing that both of these systems are really the same system that's just crushed us. I want people to check you out. I want people to watch your YouTube channel. So to close out, just tell us what we can do to help you out. We've already mentioned your YouTube channel, but where can people follow you? What can people do to listen to you and get your message out there?
Absolutely. So if you go to danforfreedom.com, that's got everything you need. It's got links to the Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter accounts. So you can follow me on all four. You can sign up to be in the mailing list, and you can donate, and you can just see a lot about my platform. I've got something there called the New American Dream, which is something that I started pushing when I was running for president. But it's a lot about what I was talking about, the cost of living and help bringing together people on the left and the right and just giving everybody what they want. So there's a really great video on that there, and there's some other great videos on different issues. There's just a ton of information on that site, but there's also a contact field. I'm very accessible. So if you want to send me a message, you can always do that there, or of course on any of the social media platforms. It's anything you can do to help out the campaign is really going to be a tremendous help, not just for me, not just for Texas, not just for America, but for the whole world.
Well, awesome, man. Yeah, you guys heard him. Go check him out. Go check out his website. Go watch his videos. I've been watching a few of his videos lately, and I'll admit I have not been a taxation is theft libertarian. I've been one of the guys who kind of was more toward a consumption tax. But I've been watching your videos, and I have been listening to other people, and I'm starting to get pulled in that direction. There is a lot about it that makes sense. It's sort of that bad messaging thing I was talking about. I've just heard so much bad messaging in that area. But when you have people who can eloquently explain how we would get to that point, it's kind of hard to argue with. So I'm certainly listening to you, and I want a bunch of other people to listen to you. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck in your race.
Yeah, thanks for having me.